as individual readers and as collective readers, as reading Dickens in community is a wonderful thing. Um, to share the feelings that we have and recognize Dickens's ability to evoke those feelings. Yeah, there are people who think that Dickens's sentimentality is a weakness in his art, but I think it's one of the great things in his novels. Oh boy. Well, it's nice to see everyone. It's nice to see faces, and it's nice to see names of people. As our custom is, wait a few minutes for latecomers to join, and then I will turn things over to our president, Wayne Batten, who is the discussion leader for today on Silas Marner. Silas Marner, the second half of the novel, but Silas Marner, the entire book, because now we have finished it. And Wayne was the one who suggested that we read Silas Marner in connection with the Old Curiosity Shop. So we hold both of those books in awareness as we talk today. I have one announcement to make, a very, very brief announcement, which is that this, as you all know, is the last meeting of the Pickwick Club for this academic year. We follow the academic year, and we take a break in July for the Dickens Universe to happen at UC Santa Cruz. If you are still considering coming to the Dickens Universe, I encourage you to do so. We have lots of wonderful talks and other events to look forward to. So please do register if you would like to spend a week living with the Old Curiosity Shop again. And the other announcement, again, very brief, is that we will need to decide on a book for next year. And Wayne and I will confer. And I think that the obvious candidate for the focus of next year's Pickwick Club will be the novel chosen as the featured novel for next year's Dickens Universe. And since that has not been announced publicly, I will not divulge the title of that novel. It has been decided, and it will be announced at the end of this year's Dickens Universe in Santa Cruz. But who knows? We might come up with another idea for a novel, or who knows, even a pair of novels. So at least one will be by Dickens. That I can promise to you. So.
And I just want to interrupt and say that we're going to have another meeting that is an add-on to our usual schedule. So on Saturday, July 12th, Malcolm Andrews will be presenting a talk called The Text and Its Pictures in the Original Edition of the Old Curiosity Shop. So it's Saturday, July 12th at 9:00 a.m. And so I'll share a link with you in the chat if you would like to join us.
That's 9 a.m. California time.
That's right.
Yes, yes. So
what time there is.
Malcolm Andrews, as you all are probably aware, is one of the leading Dickens scholars of the current moment and has written several books on Dickens and has given this talk at other venues. And I think it's a very fitting addition to our discussions of the Old Curiosity Shop. We did spend a little bit of time on the illustrations but Malcolm will go into them in much greater depth. And so thank you, Courtney, for reminding me about that. And I hope people will be able to attend on July 12th. So I will now turn things over to Wayne, who's our discussion leader for Silas Marner. So Wayne, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I have just been enjoying everybody's stories about reading Silas Marner. They're fascinating. It seems as if everyone has a fond or otherwise memory of contacting Silas Marner. I have to confess, my first contact was as a child reading Classics Illustrated, the comic book. And I remember being horrified when Molly freezes to death in the snow. That really stuck with me. But, and then, of course, later on, I went on to teach it for 30 years in high school. And I remember one of my colleagues who was a Latin teacher really kind of scowling at me. You still teach Silas Marner? And I wanted to say, what do you mean? You still teach Horace? Haven't you found something better yet? But Courtney, if we could go to that first slide, that'd be great. And I have to add that the BBC dramatization, which is available on YouTube, is really great. And it saved me all those years because I was guilty of showing it to the kids. And looking back now, I realize what a wonderful job the screenwriters did of transposing Eliot's prose to a cinematic visual format. It must have been a real challenge. But I think, as we'll see, as we'll try to show later on, there are scenes in Silas Marner that are cinematic in sense. I thought I'd better show a picture of a furze or gorse field. I don't know about you, but I was struck in Scotland to see whole fields of this, and the scent is wonderful. The Anglo-Saxons considered it a weed, and it is good for forage only when it's very, very young and tender, since it does have thorns or briars. But you remember Molly's corpse is found under a gorse or furze bush near Silas's cottage, which is then transplanted to Eppie's garden. Then, of course, on the lower left, you'll recognize Marianne Evans herself, somewhat flatteringly portrayed. Everyone who commented on her commented that she was not exactly a belle. Then in the center, something I found, Silas Marner rose. So I may get ambitious and plant one in my own yard. It's, to my mind, it's a shrub rose. Looks like a type of cabbage rose. And then on the lower right, I like this depiction of Silas with Eppie and other children in the neighborhood. And it strikes me as, I think it is available from David Austin. I'm not sure. But in the illustration here, Silas is wearing knee breeches, which is still appropriate for the time of the novel, about 1810 or 1815. Even though he's a craftsman, he would still wear knee breeches. Okay, we can go to the next slide, Courtney. I'd use this as an opening question. I could think some of us would agree that Silas Marner is a really good story. And what makes it so good, so there are at least 5 turning points: expulsion from Lantern Yard, theft of Marner's hoard, his adoption of Eppie, the discovery of Dunstan's corpse, and Godfrey's attempt to adopt Eppie, which is a consequence of that discovery. And then Eppie rejects Godfrey. So a rather complicated story viewed in this way. And I made another point here that I think Eliot took a page from Dickens by covering the backstories very early and rapidly. She doesn't even tell us much about Godfrey's marriage. That introduces a question that I did sometimes bring up with the kids. As the elder son of a squire, why did Godfrey marry the serving woman, Molly Farron? Why would he marry her? Anyone want to weigh in on if that is necessary for the plot? But it certainly tells us something about Godfrey.
Glenna.
Well, I think it's a mark of decency on his part, perhaps. Usually, well, we know in Adam Bede, for example, Hetty Sorrel is seduced and there's no gentlemanly person to rescue her from her fate of unwed pregnancy. So that's the only thing I can figure, is that he's in some ways, that's one of the more attractive things that we learn about him.
Yes, I think it is to his credit, although there might have been another motive. If I'm not mistaken, there's a record somewhere that Eppie is Godfrey's child. The botched marriage ceremony came up at our last meeting in the talk at the Rainbow Tavern. If the words are wrong, is the couple really married? And it always reminds me of George Eliot's taste for realism, because as a church organist, I was actually present at a marriage when the priest, actually the dean of the cathedral, mixed up the words exactly as the vicar does in Silas Marner. And the photographer, who was in the back of the nave, actually laughed out loud. So those things do happen. But you remember when Macy consults, I think Drumlow, the vicar, Drumlow says it's the register. The register marries them. Mm-hmm. And I think, as you know, that was one reason for a church wedding, to have a record of it, and then the proof of legitimacy for the children. So I'm just wondering if, in a sense, Godfrey is looking out for his own by having his marriage registered somewhere. As it turns out, Eppie will make no claim on him and resist the offers that he does make.
Barb has her hand up, so Barb.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, we've got this contrast of how the house looks at the beginning with the 3 men, and it looks like some sort of wild Serenity House or Man Cave or something like that. And then we've got the contrast of how it looks when after Nancy has womanized it or whatever we want to say she's done. And so, his we can assume that he was not very great guy at the beginning of the story, or maybe throughout the whole thing, depending on how you think about that last scene. But I think he would not want to get in trouble with his father, and his father would be a problem with all this, I think. Because he's always got that his whip and everything. They're rough and ready guys at the beginning of the story.
Excuse me.
It's a good question, though, I think. Why does he marry Molly? Does anyone else have thoughts about that? I mean, one possibility, as Glenna suggests, is that it shows that he may have more character than that is more moral, a stronger moral sense than he appears to have as um, um, a more typical upper class rake and seducer of working class girls. But so, Mary.
Could he have done it on impulse? He was young and rash and reckless. Maybe he didn't give much thought to the ramifications of this.
He knew his father wouldn't like it, and he did it anyway. So maybe he's acting out against his father's wishes. But other people, Linda.
For me, I agree with Mary. This is a man who never thinks of consequences, in part because he's been raised to never have to think about the future. He has no trade, he has no involvement in the running of the farm. So to me, it was completely consistent with the way he just moves through this novel with all his decisions. It's here's the moment. And he might have, at the end of chapter 10, he has a discussion with himself. But while he knows he'll face anxiety, he never chooses to do something because it's the right thing to do. It's just what he wants in the moment. That's the most expedient.
Okay. Carl.
Molly's addiction to opium kind of snuck up on me. I don't know where it's mentioned earlier in the book. Do you think he got rid of her because of that addiction, or did he marry her to help her out? I just wonder the dynamics of, but when she's walking around in the snow eating something black and she dies.
Fuck.
Did that sneak up on us in the story? Where was it mentioned before, or was that the first time?
Yes, it is a little confusing. Dunstan refers to her as Godfrey's drunken wife. Dunstan doesn't mention the opium early in the novel.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's only when Molly's walking in the snow that we get a little clearer indication that she's carrying a vial of probably laudanum. It's probably laudanum that she's carrying around. And she's resisting taking the last of it, but then finally gives in. And that may be why she falls asleep and freezes. But no, that's an interesting point. I think in the depiction of both Godfrey and Molly, Eliot is showing some, as someone mentioned it, middle-class restraint. Doesn't want to make it scary to her middle-class readers. But yeah, Godfrey may have married Molly for rather base reasons. And it's hard to say when Molly became addicted. My students were always interested in whether Molly compensates by taking opium, compensates for her loveless marriage. And the BBC dramatization does a good job of adding a scene not found in the novel, a scene where Godfrey goes and visits Molly, and it's a great addition, I think, to see how really wretched she is.
Thank you for that.
We can go to another
Don,
slide.
No, we have a question from Don or a comment.
Oh,
Don.
yeah.
I
Hey.
thought that maybe Godfrey marries her because she's pregnant and he doesn't want her coming to his father to identify or to kind of turn him in. So he kind of has his cake and eats it too. You know, he keeps her away, and then eventually she does come to see the father. But I think that probably is his fear. If he marries her, she will stay out of circulation. So that's my theory anyway.
Lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's an illegitimate question to ask, but I wonder how Dickens would have handled that particular plot element. Would he have shown more sympathy for Molly's condition? Barb.
Well, we have the drunken wife in Hard Times, right?
Yes.
And she's the sympathy all goes to, oh goodness, his name is out of my head. Her husband in Hard Times, and she is, but Dickens gives that character a kind of wretched personality as well.
Yes.
I mean, she's not a fun thing to be around anyway. And so, you know, it doesn't lay all the burden on the fact that she's addicted to something, which this book seems to be kind of skinny on who she was. Because, you know, even Wayne is relying on a visual that isn't part of the text to try to identify what she is. And so, you know, it's not there. We don't know very much about her.
There's no backstory.
There's no backstory
on Molly. Wayne, do you have an idea? You asked a good question, but
well, my pat response.
Where did your students end up on that question?
I suggested to students that I think that Eliot was afraid of offending her reader.
Mm-hmm.
If Godfrey is really, really bad, Dunstan is pretty bad. But that's probably not the only possible answer. If you're interested, I'm sure there are books on the effect of opium, and it's a huge part of English economy. But you remember Nemo in Bleak House, I think, probably ends up overdosing on opium. That is Esther's father.
Gary has his hand up.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Wayne, for choosing this novel. I have not read it in 30 years. I did not read it in high school. I was in the UK when you did the May version, and I watched the recording. But I love this novel, period. I think there's, and I love Eliot for her depiction of characters with this inner monologue or inner voice that they have. And I think that this happens so much with Godfrey. And I'm thinking of the comments that were made previously and his sense of guilt and also his fear, as you've said, of his father and what he will find out. But and then I love the question about what Dickens would do with this, and I would love it at some point if we would look at Old Curiosity Shop and the father or the grandfather and the daughter and the little girl and that Nell, and then the contrast to what's happening here in this piece with Silas and Eppie. So anyway, but as far as Godfrey goes, I think that he's consistently a character that reflects, and maybe in the end I felt a sadness for him. I mean, I was weeping when I read that segment with he and his wife. I thought it was powerful, and the fact that he marries Molly early on is just like this character that I think has an arc. So anyway, that's my rambling for the moment.
Thanks, Gary.
And
there's considerable growth in Godfrey, of course.
Yes.
From the early depictions of him as very self-centered and to his sense of guilt. And it's good also to point out the way that Eliot explores the internal consciousness of her characters, often through the use of free and direct discourse. So it's the narrator who's voicing the thoughts of the characters.
Yeah, good point.
Wayne, go ahead.
Since we're talking about marriage, as you know, Mary Ann Evans and George Henry Lewis lived a very unconventional life. And I'm not expert enough. Wish Nancy Henry were here. But I think the problem with Lewis was that to get a divorce, he would have to make public his wife's infidelity. And he was too much of a gentleman to do that. Mm. I haven't confirmed that in the biographies yet. But she had 2 sons by her lover. Lewis had 2 sons by her, if I'm not mistaken. And oddly, George Eliot agreed to pay for the education of his sons. On the other end, meanwhile, he was encouraging her to write, very supportive of her career. So I thought this was a fun picture of him as sort of a hippie, probably from the 1850s. In 1857, George Eliot's family officially broke with her, although she'd been living with Lewis since 1854. And I don't exactly know, but my feeling about that was that it took the family about 3 years to really make that decision. But certainly the depiction of Godfrey, his problems, must be in a way a reflection of the author's own difficulties. Yeah, why George Eliot, if my information is correct, agreed to pay for educating his sons, I don't know. I couldn't resist adding this last point. After Lewis died, when George Eliot, Mary Ann Evans was 61, she married John Walter Cross, who I believe was her first biographer and edited her collected letters, first collected letters. He was 40. But there's an anecdote that everyone thought, well, of course, this must be a marriage of companionship, platonic and all that. But then one evening after dinner, the hostess burst into the drawing room unannounced, where Marianne and John Walter were on the sofa, and their actions indicated that the marriage was not platonic. Anyway, unusual living arrangements. We can, oh yes, I thought you'd enjoy the dog. Same expression on Lewis and the dog. And we can go to the next slide, Courtney. I often open this novel by commenting on it as a time capsule, depicting and preserving a way of life that Eliot remembered from her girlhood in Warwickshire, to some extent, as she did in Adam Bede previously. And the class structure is based on ownership of land at the top, skilled crafts, unskilled labor, and then a certain amount of vagabondage on the bottom. And then a picture of a loom. Silas is quite distinct from Dickens' characters because he has a valuable skill, which he's able to sell. And possibly could make very beautiful linen cloth on his loom. Whereas in, for example, in the old curiosity shop, no one really has this solid craft. Maybe the brasses are lawyers of kinds. And then I've commented on the contrast between the rather simple folk of Ravelot and the voice of the narrator, which is anything but simple. Let's see. And of course, you'll remember collecting rent is the first crisis for the Cass brothers when Dunstan has taken the rent money that was paid, and Godfrey has to come up with it somehow to avoid his father's wrath.
Yes, Barb.
One sort of interesting thing about the pastoral idea of this book is right at the beginning, she says that Marner is not even capable of reflection. And as the book goes on, certainly he does become capable of reflection. And we do have much more, we see him as a much more complex character. So she does have a little trouble holding on to that pastoral trope. And I also think that the very end of the contrast between what Lantern Yard has become and the horrors of the Industrial Revolution, contrasting with the we're just going to have a garden in the backyard, daddy, and everything will be okay kind of thing. I don't know how if that works 100%. Well, first of all, we only have like what, 2 pages of what happened to Lantern Yard, the horrors of the Industrial Revolution. So I think that's an interesting theme that we may think works or not.
Good points to raise. We should probably say more or think more. Wayne, help us think more about the time span of this novel. But first, Karen has.
Yeah, this is a segue into the whole pastoral aspect that sort of attracted me from the very beginning, where Eliot quotes Wordsworth on her title page. And so I went back to, I love Wordsworth. So of course I pulled up Michael, which is a pastoral poem, and which is where this quote comes from. The quote is, "A child, more than all other gifts that earth can offer to declining man, brings hope with it and forward-looking thoughts." And so there are a lot of Wordsworthian qualities, I think, in Silas Marner. The whole notion of unity of people and non-human elements. And that's an aspect of Dickens that I always loved as well. But this continuous notion of things like the woods and the hearth, the quarry, we have plants, we have seasons, flowers, they're all continuous with human activity. And one of the authors who has written on Silas Marner is Frederick Carl. He's a professor of English at NYU. And I quote, "This underscores the interwoven quality of the lives of people and characters and their environment." And that's very pastoral. And that's one of the qualities of Dickens. So I see a lot of comparable yet, so different styles between Eliot and Dickens and the Old Curiosity Shop and Silas Marner. And you know how the internet sort of makes you go down these rabbit holes. So I looked up Dickens and Wordsworth, and I found a site called Literary Feuds. It was really, really interesting. And it talked about Dickens being introduced in 1843 to Wordsworth, who at that time would have been 73. Dickens was only 31. And when Wordsworth was asked what he thought of Dickens, this is what he said: "I am not much taken to turn critic on people I meet, but as you ask me, I will candidly avow that I thought him a very talkative, vulgar young person. But I dare say he may be very clever. Mind, I don't want to say a word against him, for I have never read a line he has written." And so Wordsworth puts Dickens to bed. But when Dickens was asked about his impression of Wordsworth, he said, "Like him? Not at all. He's a dreadful old ass." And I just thought that was a fun way to look at some of these things. Forster is noted as saying that Dickens had very little love for Wordsworth. But come on, I mean, if we go back to the Old Curiosity Shop, I think it was David who brought in the Wordsworth poem, "We Are Seven," and this notion of the simple child being very much a contributor to Dickens' portrait of Little Nell. So I don't know what we're to believe, but I think the whole pastoral Wordsworthian notion is certainly a characteristic of Dickens. And there's just a lot of Wordsworth and Dickens and Eliot. So that's my little segue aside.
Interesting to find this in a post about literary feuds. I think the feuds is about personalities, not about literary sympathies. And Dickens certainly was familiar with Wordsworth's poetry, and there are many Wordsworthian elements, particularly surrounding childhood and rural life, that bring the two together. But Thank you for that. Carl.
I made a friend recently who's absolutely a genius about Victorian literature. By the way, one of his favorite books ever is Silas Marner. And I'm interested in this Calvinism that Silas comes from. It's a really weird sect because while it's a Protestant religion, he can't relate to any of the religion to the place he comes from. So they must have been some really weird people casting lots and doing other things. I was wondering in the first meeting, did you bring up the book of Job relative to Silas Marner?
No.
Well, it happens. People always want to know why bad things happen to people or good things happen to people. And of course, when he loses his gold, everybody comes to him. A number of people come well-meaning, like Job's friends, who sit on the heap with him and they admonish him for days, but they throw that thing into him. You know, obviously your gold got stolen and stuff like that happened because you don't go to church. That's the reason. You're not a good person. So this Job theme enters immediately into this. And so a number of well-meaning people, but they don't realize that the harm they're doing. They want to explain to him, which we can't explain in this world, why things happen to us at all, period. And the flip side of that Job thing is at the end of the book, now who's the bad guy? He thinks that everything works out fine in the end, that he finds his gold and everything works out because he basically has been going to church for years and years. So there is something that he did in his life that caused him to have a good outcome, both for his daughter and for Silas Marner.
I'm glad you brought up Calvinism because in the earlier part of the book, William Dane really believed that he was among the elect, and that made it possible for him to betray Silas as he does. So in Lantern Yard, I think we get a critique of that Calvinistic religion.
But it's the worst of Calvinism. It's absolutely the worst.
Yes, yes.
That particular franchise was really bad.
Yes, indeed.
And of course, Lantern Yard people don't go to church, they go to chapel. The distinction between the evangelical Protestant sects, the Calvinist tradition, and the Anglican tradition where people go to church. And so Silas doesn't understand when Dolly Winthrop says that Epi needs to be christened. He knows about baptism, which is the total immersion of the adult, but he doesn't know about christening, which is the Anglican tradition. But Glenna.
Okay, thank you. I want to go back to talking about pastoral.
Good.
I really want to bring up the character of Dolly Winthrop. I think that, I mean, I'm not an expert, but I'm going to go ahead and generalize anyhow. I think George Eliot's rural women are close to unique in Victorian literature. They're, you know, Dolly is a fount of wisdom. She has her limitations, but she's a fount of wisdom. In Middlemarch, Mrs. Garth. But most particularly, in Adam Bede, there's a character, Mrs. Poyser. These are not upper-class women, but they're given not only dignity, but they're given wisdom. And my daughter took a course years ago at Yale on the Condition of England novel, and she learned and told me, and I'm repeating it because I think it's not, she didn't make it up, that Mrs. Poyser, an Eliot character, was quoted in Parliament because she had wise things to say about something or other. So I think one of the reasons that I was drawn to this novel as a little kid is I was looking for, you know, strong female characters. And Dolly is a very sympathetic character, with her limitations. I think this is just something, a voice that Eliot brings to literature that is not that frequently encountered. And one other thing that I want to say while I have the floor, the pictures of rural life and the rainbow and the tavern and just the kind of, the skill has been brought up. The literary work that this reminds me of is a wonderful, wonderful series. The English translation is Sketches from a Hunter's Album by Turgenev. And he gives the serfs, as they then were, inner lives and dignity. And for that, he got exiled to he got home confinement on his estate because it was so radical in Tsarist Russia to see the serfs as human. But there's this wonderful sympathy for and respect for the lives of rural people that I think is just a wonderful contribution that Eliot makes.
I think that's a very good comment about her sense of rural community and ordinary people, as well as people in the upper classes. So this novel exemplifies that, as does Adam Bede. And I like also your comments about Dolly Winthrop, and there are more things I think we could say about her, but I'm just wondering if anyone has things to say about the pastoral before we leave that topic. I mean, one of the central themes that I think we can connect to pastoral is childhood. Just what do people think of the representation of Epi as a child? In what ways is Epi a figure of pastoral? Barb.
Well, back to Dolly again. I mean, Dolly gives all kinds of child information, when they get to be this age, you can't hold them back, and you got to keep things, get the scissors out of her way and all these really practical things that she says, which are, perfectly, which are true. And the fact that Silas wouldn't know them is perfectly true. But the pastoral, we've got some weasels in the pastoral thing. I mean, the cast boys are not too nice. And, those of us that have grown up in small towns know that it all seems so nice and perfect until you look around a little bit and it's not as it was in the past, and there are weasels everywhere if you look. And so I don't think Epi's idealized. She always, I love you, Father, everything's beautiful, let's build a garden, I'll marry this guy. But the rest of it is not 100% glorious, although we are living in a time where people would like to go back to everything being much simpler, but she does not make it quite as glorious as some of those scenes in Curiosity Shop when they come to those bower-like places and they're sitting, and it's very idealized.
Weasels even in the garden, maybe even snakes.
Yes.
Peter, and then Clark.
I'm thinking like when she first appears in Marner's life in chapter 13. She was perfectly quiet now, but not asleep, only soothed by sweet porridge and warmed into that wide-gazing calm which makes us older human beings with our inward turmoil feel a certain awe in the presence of a little child, such as we feel before some quiet majesty or beauty in the earth or sky, before a steady glowing planet or a full-flowered eglantine, or the bending trees over a silent pathway. So she's identified with natural beauty from like of Edenic, Edenic pastoral natural beauty.
That's a wonderful. Go
yeah.
ahead. Go ahead.
Anyway, her innocence is Edenic, it's pastoral.
That's a wonderful passage, and I thought it was the most lyrical moment in the entire novel. But thank you for reading it, and thank you for singling it out. So Clark.
And I like the fact that Epi she's got a little mischief in her too. She's not she's certainly not obedient in her early years. She cuts the tether and wanders out into the fields to explore the wonders of nature. And I also think it's interesting that Silas learns how to be a father in a large part from Dolly's experience as a mother. And Silas does take her advice frequently, but it's not always accurate. It's not always helpful. The coal hole punishment is a total flop. And Silas decides I'm not going to punish Epi again, which is, I would say, probably a pretty remarkable Victorian moment, right? Like, you don't punish your kids? And she turns out to be quite a loving individual. And the great thing about Dolly for me is that she's a questioner. The conversations that she has with Silas about theology are fascinating, open to possibility, asking the big questions. Why do bad things happen to good people? And so I see these as very genuine conversations that kind of cut against conventional grain along the way, which is delightful.
Very good observations, particularly about child raising. And Epi is not totally idealized. She has a little bit of mischief in her, and maybe not enough adolescence in her. We don't see any rebelliousness, but that's maybe expecting something a little too much. But Carl.
It's good for Dolly. She unfortunately had to raise 4 boys. So she was a wonderful mother, and she got to learn how to mother a girl, which was really, really good for her. I have a really simple, ridiculous question. When did the word pastor relative to the ecclesia come into being? And does pastoral and pastor have any relationship to each other? I'm not phrasing the question well, I know that. When I think of pastures, I think of going to my grandmother's farm as a kid. And it was a simple, quiet life. So are those words related at all, or I'm just playing with something?
A pastor is a shepherd.
I know that.
So the 2 words are related.
Oh, right. Okay. Dumb of me. Sorry.
No, not dumb. A good point. Both about the genre and its traditional association with the role of the clergy in the Christian tradition.
Well, we call Jesus the shepherd.
Yes.
And therefore the person who takes care of the congregation becomes the shepherd as well.
Yes. Yes. With Dolly's help, one of the things that Silas is able to do is to explore his memory. One of the things that Silas seems blocked about psychologically is his memory, is his memory of the past. And Dolly is the only one, or the first one anyway, who gets him to tell the story of Lantern Yard. And it's not that he has forgotten that story, but he can't tell it to anyone else. And Dolly, in that sense, is a good listener who helps Silas to go back and understand not just the facts of what happened, but its meaning for him. So I think Dolly is a crucial figure in the novel. And at the very end of Silas Marner, after the wedding of Aaron and Effie, there are 4 people who go back to the house, and their names are not mentioned. But Dolly's husband has stopped at the Rainbow to have a drink, and she has been at the wedding. So I think the 4 people who go back are husband and wife, Silas, and Dolly. So Dolly is included in that final sense of community. So Glenna.
I'll be quick. I want to speak to Carl's question. My grandfather, born in Italy, came to this country and became a Methodist minister, and he posed for a picture, which I have, when he was quite a young man, holding, I don't think it was a lamb, I think it's a baby goat, and he was giving visual expression to being a pastor.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
Wayne,
Thank you. That's a great observation. Thank you.
Wayne, back to you.
On the question of pastor, as far as I can tell, Edmund Spencer in the late 1500s used pastor to refer to churchmen as if they were shepherds. And then a certain Milton does later in the 17th century. I don't pick up pastor used that way earlier. As I have not made a total study of this, but Chaucer, for example, has a parson's tale, not the pastor's tale. But my suggestion is that using the word pastor to mean churchmen at least dates from the late 1500s. Yeah. I want to use this as this great discussion of Dolly. I do have a quotation from her on the next slide, as a matter of fact. Okay. Dolly's visits punctuate the second half of the novel after the theft of Marner's gold. And I wanted to bring up her first visit to Marner, where she brings him some lard cakes stamped with the first 3 letters of Jesus in Greek. And I won't try to say them, but she doesn't know what they mean. But very possibly it's a stamp used to make communion bread. So the gift of the lard cakes is a kind of ceremony, of which Dolly's not entirely sure, but she just knows that the letters must be good or they wouldn't be on the church cloth. The lard cakes that she brings to Silas would have been delicious, probably very rich, sweet, perhaps with currants or raisins. So we're getting a contrast with the religion of Lantern Yard here between the sort of, what's the word, simple religion of Dolly, who just trusts what she knows must be good because it's in the church. But on the left, here's a quotation from Dolly referring to that past Silas Marner. And it's direct discourse. I think that's the correct term for it. That's as if she's speaking herself. It's the will of them above, as many things should be dark to us. There's some things I've never felt in the dark about, and they're mostly what comes in the day's work. You were hard done by that once, Master Marner, and it seems as you will never know the rights of it, but that doesn't hinder there being a rights, Master Marner, for all it's dark to you and me. Now, on the right, we have a passage describing Nancy Lammeter, who's on the other side of the social scale here. This is not direct discourse. I think the correct term is free indirect discourse. But here we have the narrator speaking for Nancy. Even Nancy, with all the acute sensibility of her own affections, shared her husband's view that Marner was not justifiable in his wish to retain Eppie after her real father had avowed himself. She felt it was a very hard trial for the poor weaver, but her code allowed no question that a father by blood was to have a claim above that of any foster father. So we get a lot of distance here between the narrator and Nancy. I don't know about you, but I find myself not liking Nancy. If you remember, this is a scene where Godfrey is trying to adopt Eppie, and Eppie refuses. But I find myself liking Nancy less as I read, and Dolly more. I don't know if anyone else has any reflections on the nearly perfect Nancy Lammeter.
And we can't leave out her sister too.
Oh, Priscilla.
Priscilla.
Yes.
So yeah, what do people think about Nancy and Priscilla? So, Patricia. Not hearing.
Forgot that part.
Yeah.
She's evolving during the story from being a single person to being the wife of Mr. Cass. So, I mean, and that is her role then, is to kind of agree with him, I guess, in that time. I mean, is she going to rebel against him? I wanted to comment, and I haven't read much George Eliot, so to me, it seems like she paints a halo above all the women, over all the women, and the men seem to all have faults. Now, I don't know those of you who have read her other books if that holds true. And maybe that's a false thinking on my part. But I would wonder if that follows through to her other novels.
Well, we should stick to this novel for the time being, but we might draw some comparisons with other novels. It's sometimes said that because George Eliot was not a conventionally beautiful woman, that she did not like and did not give favorable representations to women who were pretty, and that she has a fondness for women who are not noted for being beautiful or for being pretty. So the contrast between the two sisters, one beautiful, one compared constantly to roses, to the flower roses, and the other sister who refers to herself as ugly. So, and who is a single woman. But Nancy is a complicated figure in the novel, and I think we should have some discussion of her. So Barb, and then David Brownell.
Well, I absolutely love the way that she characterizes how she gets to characterizing Nancy, because we first see her as kind of being the belle of the ball, and then suddenly Elliot slips in these little things about how vapid she is. and then in the later scenes when she's sitting out with her Bible, from outward appearance it looks as if she's studying her Bible, but that's not what she's doing at all. So we get I just love how we get to the place where somebody said, we don't really like her very much. she has a lot of qualities that and even this, I am the mother, I myself am the mother of an adopted child, and this kind of attitude, you still hear it, or I have certainly still heard it, that the blood claim is the highest thing, that you simply can't have the same relationship with somebody that's not of your blood. So as I'm just praising her for Nancy and Priscilla. Priscilla's a whole nother, I'm not going to carry on.
Okay, maybe we can get back to Priscilla, but we can stick with Nancy for the time being. David. And then Margot. Be sure to unmute, David. Not hearing you, David. David, we can't hear you yet.
I'm working on it.
Yes.
With the screen shared, my controls are hard to get at.
Okay.
One of the things that's going on, it seems to me, is our old friend, social class. And of course, not only does Godfrey have the right of being the real father, he has more money and social superiority. And therefore, well, of course he should be able to take the child from Silas. Is her, she doesn't think about it, but that's her attitude. there's a good deal of social class differentiation that's going on.
It's very, very much a class issue. I mean, to put it crudely, Godfrey and Nancy want to purchase,
Uh-huh.
and they feel they have a right to. But Margot.
Well, I just thought from the moment that we find out that Nancy had her sister who wasn't anything like her, dressed like her, and then, of course, she never would condescend to wear the color that might work better with her sister because it wouldn't work better with me. I'm going, this is not a nice person, no matter what kind of other ways she's dressing herself up. I think it's also like Barbara said, I think it was Barbara that was reading the Bible, but wasn't really reading the Bible. I think that's pretty much what's going on with this woman from the get. So I do not think that George had very nice opinions about her. That's all.
Okay. Gary.
Well, I'm going to take another view of this. As you said, John, Nancy is a complicated character.
Yes.
When I read that part about the rights to bloodline, it bothered me too about her a lot. However, she and Godfrey have not had kids. And I'm looking at it from that perspective. And so she's using that as a way to justify what she has painfully felt for a long time. So I don't know. I have some sympathy for her there on that. And I'm not saying that she's right about the bloodline, but I also think that her behavior or her thought through the narrator is suggesting that there's more to her than that.
Okay, at least one voice with sympathy for Nancy. So Margot again.
Well, that just makes me think, once again, that she's thinking of herself and what she wants, and couching it in these other feelings or ideas. Mm-hmm. It's not really, so I'd say that the through line is not that she's, well, she is poor me, but she feels that she wants to get her way. That's all.
What do people think about her response to her husband's confession about his previous marriage?
Very interesting.
His previous marriage and his paternity.
Wow.
In relation to her complexity. And remember, I mean, I hope other people notice that she's lost at least one child of her own.
Right. Yes.
In infancy. No one wants to pick up on that. Godfrey is expecting that she will have a strongly negative reaction to his confession of his earlier marriage and the fact that he's the father of Epi. And that's not the reaction that she has. She's very supportive of him. And yes, she joins in the class arrogance of saying that the bloodline is more important than the intimate relationship that Silas has had with Epi.
I think she loves her husband. And I think that in itself is, you know, I think that she's certainly surprised and upset, but at the same time, she loves her husband. So that would be my defense on that.
Okay. Linda.
You're muted, Linda.
For a change. Oops. Am I now?
Yes, you're
No.
fine. We can hear you.
I was going to say what Gary said. I mean, she's appalled at his behavior, but she has spent her marriage feeling not so much inadequate, but very saddened that her husband has a distance and a very internal life that she can't get at because of the absence of a child. And she sees that as something that he wants so much. So when Godfrey confesses to her, she says, you know, nothing is worth doing wrong for. Even I was not worth doing wrong. So she's a complex lady.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah.
So we have two sides, both for and against. So thank you, Linda. Wayne, do you want to carry on with slides or continue this discussion about women?
No, I'll go to the next slide.
Okay.
Sure. There we are. This is the about the same period. Someone asked about the timing here. The novel seems to open near the end of the Napoleonic Wars because landed people are still making good money on their crops. But this is about maybe 1815. And I thought it was worth noting they do not look like Victorians at all. And it looks like some of the young men have come to the dance in their riding boots. But part of my slides cut up. At this point in the novel, the New Year's Eve dance, the two plot lines come together. That is the Godfrey Cass story and the Silas Marner story. Meanwhile, of course, as you know, Molly Farron is trying to make good on her threat to expose Godfrey. So while all this is cheerfully going on in the Red House, Molly is about to freeze to death in the snow. I did want to comment that Nancy Lamouter opposes adoption until she learns that Godfrey is the actual biological father. But Nancy's reason for opposing, we're told, is that she thought opposing adoption is that it would be flying in the face of Providence, defying Providence. So, and that is partly a religious motivation to oppose Godfrey in this sense. Speaking of women, I want to point out that at least one recent critic has stated that Epi is a vapid character and does not grow and develop. It seems to me you might say that of maybe some other Dickens women, but not of Eppie, because we have, of course, late in the novel, the major turning point when Eppie turns down Godfrey and Nancy. So anyone want to weigh in on whether we see Eppie develop in the course of the novel in a way really that contrasts sharply with little Nell, who seems to be mostly static, stunned by her condition.
Lena.
Okay, well, I am pro Epi. I mean, I do think she develops because she's seen as having been somewhat willful as a small child, and I think, well, I mean, I think of little Emily, for example, and David Copperfield, who dreams all the time about becoming a lady. And yeah, I think to me, it's realistic that a somewhat willful child would see and be grateful for the steady love of her foster father and respond in kind and look beyond the class advantage to be gained by aligning with the Cass family. And I think I think it's wonderful. I think her character does develop, and I think it's I believe in the evolution, not so much a transformation. And I think it's probably one of the reasons I liked the novel so much when I was a little kid, because I wanted to believe in those values. So enough for me.
Peter.
I would just contrast the old curiosity shop. Nell is never going to get married, and it always almost annoys me in a certain sense that she's attached to her grandfather, and her grandfather is kind of like a ball and chain that prevents her from having a full life of her own. And not in this novel, though, because I think Aaron and Epi are given the opportunity of actually taking care of their father and like making like a larger family, whereas Nell doesn't seem to have that much of possibility in her life. She's dedicated to taking care of her father. She doesn't even think of anything else. But you know. Epi is a fuller character. She's like attached to both her grandfather and she doesn't like, I don't think she detests Godfrey or anything. It's just that her heart is in a different place, but anyways, I think she seems to be a more full character than Nell does in the old Curiosity Shop. Okay.
One of the reasons to read these two novels together is, I think, to make precisely this comparison. And I think that was behind Wayne's suggestion that we read them together. So, and there is a passage toward the end where after Epi says, "I don't want to be a lady." I mean, that's sort of what sums up her resistance to the for me, absolutely awful moment of class arrogance and privileging of the power of money and the power of birth over sympathy and human connection in this novel. But there's a point where Godfrey fears that Epi hates him, and Nancy does not respond directly to that. And in keeping silent, she refrains from telling Godfrey that he's probably right. So again, she's being a good wife, but I think there's also some compassion that he's already in pain, and why cause him any more pain? So her tactful silence thing is not just gender submission. I think it's as an element of sympathy or compassion for her husband. But yes, Epi gets to marry and has a multi-generational family. And those of you who remember Great Expectations might think of Wemmick's father. And the happy multi-generational family that they produce. So, Gary.
Well, I'm absolutely, and I'm also thinking about, Peter's comment on Epi and Nell, and then I'm thinking about the grandfather in Old Curiosity Shop and Silas, and the whole idea of the grandfather being driven by money and never, we only begin to have some sympathy for him at the end of the novel, but I'm not sure how much I have for him at the end. Even at the end, I have some, but he's driven the whole time. And Silas is initially, but then he realizes his gold is Epi.
Yes.
And I don't know that the grandfather ever realizes Nell is gold until she's gone, till she's dead. So, I'm just thinking about that as with the two novels and how they're working and how those figures, Silas and the grandfather, play out, and how the two young girls respond to them.
Very useful. Good comment.
Yeah.
Wayne.
Ask students a related question. How is it possible for Silas to respond the way he does from the beginning with Epi? How does what do we know about him that makes it plausible that he would decide to keep the child as he does and then raise her as he does? This is something, of course, we don't see in Trent, Grandfather Trent, in the Old Curiosity Shop.
No, that's a good question. I mean, we talked last time when we were with Nancy Henry about the fact that Silas is an outsider and he's shunned and he has nothing in common with the other residents of Raveloe, who consider him strange and peculiar and shun him, including their children. I mean, he doesn't have relationship with the children of Raveloe, and yet he has the capacity to recognize that Epi could be a part of his life. What is it in Silas? I mean, Silas does learn from Dolly to be a mother or something like a mother. He has maternal abilities, capacities. So, Margot. And then Barb.
You're muted.
He has loved in the past. He loved a woman.
Yes.
He loved his friend. And isn't there something said when he finds Epi about his sister that maybe passed away earlier? So something that just spoke to those images from the past. It's an awakening for him that he doesn't, he doesn't see right away, but happens. That's what I would say.
Okay. Barb?
And when he was talking to Dolly about the past, at one point he says that he and his friend William Dane, that they shared everything half by half, that it was he understood a relationship that was like that he could share everything with a person. So we have some knowledge that he has had that ability.
Russ.
I was going to say that Silas is a very lonely person, but he's also very much a community person. When he lived in the previous city, he was part of a community, and he loved and he enjoyed that. So when he came to Raveloe, he was yes, he was an outsider, but he was still a lonely person. So he focused that into his gold, and then that sort of replaced that need for companionship and for love. But then once the gold was gone, then he had nothing. And so when this came up, he suddenly realized that this was an opportunity for him, and he was definitely not going to let go of it.
Right.
Yes, we do have enough of a backstory of Silas to recognize the presence of close companionship, both with the community and with a friend and with a woman. And one of the saddest things for me about Silas is how lonely he is. He has the description of Christmas, everyone else in Raveloe is celebrating Christmas with loved ones, and Silas is alone. Wayne, do you have more slides you want to take us to?
I have one last slide.
Okay.
Yeah. But we've already covered some of these things. Number 2, this catalepsy, the author first uses that word, I think, on the night of the New Year's party. One scholar has said it's probably narcolepsy.
Oh.
But is this just a random feature that is required by the plot, or is there something more significant about these trances that overtake Marner from time to time?
Carl.
I'm a retired trauma surgeon with a great deal of knowledge of epilepsy. I'm not sure when the word came into being, but I think it is epilepsy, but it's not consistent because he has kind of petit mal kinds of things and he has these other things. So I'm not an expert on this, but it's a good question to ask. I mean, it's a good thing to discuss. I don't know exactly what is going on with them, but certainly in those days, it would, because of the religious significance of seizures in the Bible, it makes you an outcast. Um, and in fact, you were very much an outcast until the 1940s. Um, but it's a good. I think it works well with the plot, but again, I'm not sure exactly what his diagnosis is. As I said, I had a little bit of experience with it, but it is a complex way that it is presented.
Peter.
Actually, the term catalepsy is used in Edgar Allan's Poe's A Premature Burial, where a guy, he's afraid that he's going to be, because
Right.
he has this case of catalepsy, when he goes into one of his fits, he's afraid he's going to be considered dead and buried alive. So anyway, the term actually, at least I know, goes back to Poe, and Poe uses it as a plot device in, one of his stories. Anyway, I just thought of it as, she had to come up with some sort of excuse, for things happening. And I thought it was very clever, clever device, to get from here to there. Whether it makes any, like realistic sense or not, it's kind of like, it's kind of part of the fairy tale plot, something it's like the ring, you wear the ring and you become invisible in a fairy tale. It's like catalepsy is one of those sort of devices that sort of advances the action. Anyway, that's all.
How does it function to forward the action? What's its purpose? What's it doing in the novel? What is Eliot? How is she using it?
I read the whole novel about a month and a half ago, he needs to not know what's going on. So the catalepsy, I'm not quite sure I have an answer to your question, because like I said, I read the novel like a month and a half, the whole thing quickly, a month and a half ago. Anyhow, but he needs to be unaware of the things that are going on around him. He needs to be disappeared from the scene in order for other things to happen. That's all I can say. I don't maybe have a better answer than I do.
Yes, Glenna.
Maybe the role that the catalepsy plays in the plot goes back to the issue of why would Silas take in this child? The fact that she enters when he's in some kind of a trance, it must have, and given his own religious upbringing, maybe it seemed almost like to him divine intervention of some kind. I've lost my gold. Here's this golden-haired child. She enters mysteriously and miraculously. And so that to me might be the plot function.
Yes, Don.
I agree with Glenna about that it does serve for Epi to show up without him knowing how she's there, and that seems almost magical. But I also think that it is sets him apart from everybody already. He's already a stranger coming to the town, but with this mysterious thing that happens to him, it makes him even a stranger or a more difficult person to understand and sets him even further apart. So I think it serves two purposes.
Epi's appearance is a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
It's a magical gift from what is it that Dolly calls it? Those that are above. Yes, Russell.
I was just going to say that things need to happen that had Silas been aware, they could not have happened. If he did not have that cataleptic response, and the door, he would have been in his home, his door would have been closed, the child would have never, he probably never would have heard the child, and that would have been the end of that story. In the first case, when he had that response, he probably, his friend never would have been able to manage all of those things if Silas had been aware. So in both cases, it took a major step in the plot by Silas sort of being moved out of the story for that temporary time period.
Yes, yes, those are the two key points where catalepsy helps the plot. So Wayne, do you want to take us to other questions on your list?
Let's see. This has come up briefly before. The attempt that Silas and Effie make to find Lantern Yard, and it's not there. And of course, this resembles a late scene in the old curiosity shop where I guess it's Kit who tries to find the shop and it's not there. Yeah, but I wanted to point out the contrast here between the sort of pastoral world depicted in Ravelot and the industrial town in the north, where Silas and Effie see the people coming out of the factory for their midday meal, and how much social change would have taken place. Someone asked about the time frame. I'm guessing the novel begins about 1810 or 1815, but the trip to Lantern Yard is about 1830 or a little after 1830, when there was already a good deal of labor unrest, which we see depicted in the old curiosity shop.
We don't see any labor unrest in Silas Marner. I mean, the novel is remarkable in having a working class protagonist.
Yes.
But and one of the things that is happening in the real social world between 1810 and the 1830s is a lot of political unrest and working class protest. And Silas is removed from that world. Hand weavers are obsolete or all becoming obsolete by 1830. But Silas is removed from, Silas doesn't, the idea of joining a union or anything like that is remote from Ravelot. Yes, Barb.
When I lived in England, I took a class on the history of London, and the professor that taught it over and over again said, that historians want to say that the biggest development of the Victorian age was steam trains, that the connection of people through steam trains. But he said that he firmly believed that it was the power loom that was the most important change, because they had to be in factories, brought in the children that helped to repair the threads, and caused all the social unrest that came from that.
So Silas is a figure from a dying industry.
Mm-hmm.
Carl.
Is this the period of the Luddites? Is that how you say that word, Luddites?
Yes.
Is that what's going on here?
It's not going on here.
Oh no, not there, but
in
is
this
that
novel.
outside of Ravelo?
Outside of Ravelo, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And the Luddites were machine breakers. They were they were losing the source of their income because they were being replaced by machines. I mean, we all too familiar in more recent industrial history. And they took to violence, but Silas is spared. That he's spared that particular difficulty. Yes, so Peter.
Yeah, it strikes me that the same thing's going on in Great Expectations. Like we have a character who is, is a tradesman, but he doesn't work in a factory. He works for himself. He's like he's a smith. Anyway, but it strikes me that maybe the same impulse is going on. I haven't read Felix Holt's, but Felix Holt, I understand, is about precisely like labor issues and labor unrest and radical. Felix Holt radical, and it's on my bucket list. I just haven't read it yet. So she could have done that. She could have she could have written a novel, or she did write a novel, but it strikes me that pushing this into the past, it gives it a more sort of like universal feel, a more sort of like a more psychological uh, uh, profile than it's not a social novel. It's like it's about human psychology and depth psychology, or so she doesn't want to deal with the social unrest of the 30s and 40s, of labor unrest. She wants to deal with like human feeling and human emotion, and they're a little bit more psychological than it is a social novel. I don't know.
No, I think you're right, and it's about the alienation from community and then the re-entry into community.
Yeah, it's sort of more general. It's more it's more abstract than a social historical novel, but actually more concrete too, in the sense that it's personal. Yeah, I identify with a lot of the feeling of the novel as so anyway. Okay, I'll shut up.
Wayne, is there any other question here in your final slide that you want to direct us to?
Well, number 4 is a tribute to my students who for years wanted to say that Silas becomes addicted to Epi. That's the way teenagers think. They start with one idea and can't stop. And I would always say, no, he's not addicted to Epi. He's devoted to her. But they were very reluctant to give up that idea, partly because it makes a nice pattern. We've got Molly-Farron and opium and Silas and hoarding. And so you have, you've got to have more addiction. So I think at one point when the gold is recovered, Silas does say it takes no hold of me now.
Yeah.
But if I lost you, Epi, it might. I don't know. So maybe the boys had a certain point there. I'm not sure.
Yes, Russell.
I was just going to add that I think that Silas was not addicted because when the proposition was presented, that she could that he could give her up and she could go and live with Nancy and her husband, he was willing to let Eppie make the decision. So even though it might have been a difficult decision for him, I think that he would have been able to cope with it if that's what she really wanted, but she did not. So, but I don't think he had an addiction to her in the same way that the grandfather in the Old Curiosity Shop did. To me, that was somehow more of an addiction than this was.
Yes, I wish I had thought of that in response. That's a very good point.
Barb.
Yeah.
Barb, go ahead.
You're muted.
Sorry. Grandfather Trent, it's a mental disability as well, because he has told himself that he is doing all this to help her, that if he just gets the big win, then he will be taking care of her. But in so doing, he completely, well, kills her, ruins her, and Silas is, when he's counting his gold all alone, I think we have a bit of sympathy for him, that he's lonely and he doesn't seem that he has serious mental problems like Grandfather Trent does. He seems raving at some points, for sure. And falling for those guys who are gonna set him up and take his money by playing with him out in the woods there, that, Silas is more of a thinking person than that, I think.
And then there's that horrible scene where grandfather steals into
Yes.
where Nell is sleeping in order to take her money, and that
Yes.
people have read as a kind of assault on her, perhaps even a sexual assault, or a willingness to manipulate her and take advantage of her in a way that is beyond senile dementia, has a predatory quality to it. Well, the place that Nancy Henry began with us in our first discussion of Silas Marner was with the anecdote about Marner phobia, about people who were forced to read Silas Marner in the 8th grade and who have hated it ever since. And we began this session with people confessing that they really loved this novel. So what did you love about it? What is it that makes this novel still moving, humanly moving, psychologically interesting and compelling? What do you love about this novel? Those of you who were willing to admit that you've overcome your Marner phobia. What will you remember from this rereading of it, if it's a second reading? So, Karen.
What I loved about it was the fact that it was somber yet hopeful, a very realistic depiction, I think, of the sometimes irretrievable past. It had some magic to it, but it had a lot of realism and just so elegantly economical in her words. You know, the shortness of it and yet the emotional intensity. So, and I love happy endings. So,
Yes,
especially now for the most part. So I just found it enchanting to reread this novel. And earlier I had signed on earlier and I thanked Wayne profusely for linking these two. I just found it really, really useful. So
good. Thank you. And Barb.
Well, for me, the plot is, you know, sentimental, and a lot of the interaction between Silas and Eppie sometimes is over the top. But for me, as I said before, when I read that line attributing to Silas the inability to reflect, and you know, I have known some people in my life that I think cannot reflect upon their actions or have any sort of growth like that. But I thought, heavens, let's watch this. And I really enjoyed the power of his change. And the book that I've got is some sort of copied in Las Vegas book, because I couldn't find my real book, so I ordered this other one. And it keeps saying, in the notes all say, this is redemption. No, it's much more complicated than that. And when Dolly sits down and talks about the big issues, you know, why do horrible things happen to people? You know, why do good people die and the kids live on? She even says that one. But you know, it's a lot more to it than just a redemption plot.
Okay, thank you for that. Glenna.
Well, I already confessed that I liked it when I was in high school, making myself a pariah. But since having lived quite a few years since high school, the whole idea of a child is potentially redemptive, or changing, not necessarily redemptive, but changing the trajectory of a life. I have seen, I won't go into specifics, I have seen the impact that a child can have, having a child can have on changing the trajectory of a life. I don't think this is a sentimental theme. I think that it doesn't always happen, but it can happen. And it's a marvelous thing when it does. And I love the depiction of that process in this book.
Clark.
This is the first time I've read the book. I'm 65 years old. And I'm not sure I would have liked it when I was in the 8th grade, but it's certainly a story that resonates with someone at my age. And I find it both a terrific expose in the sense of English society, and Eliot is taking folks to task in a helpful way. There's humor in the story, fantastic characters, and I can't help but think that Eliot is kind of instructing Wordsworth by using that epigraph, because that story does not go well. The son is sent off to the city to make money to buy back the land that the family has lost, and he becomes just a horrible, destitute person. And this seems to be maybe a kind of corrective possibility, and I don't know, neo-romantic. I don't even know what to call it, but I find it quite uplifting. And I taught it to a group of students this spring, thanks to Wayne's suggestion, and they liked it. So I think there's hope.
Our time is up. Thank you all for attending, for reading these two novels with us this year. This is the last session, but starting in September, we'll be reconvening and you will hear from Courtney. And in the meantime, you will find out what the novel or novels for next year will be. So on behalf of the Pickwick Club in Santa Cruz, thank you all. Thank you, Courtney, for being here to guide us, and Ava in absence. And thank you, Wayne, for guiding us today and for being our president. So have a good rest of your summer. I'll see some of you in Santa Cruz, and be well and keep reading Dickens and 19th century novels.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So good to see Courtney.
Yes, yes.